state penalty fund revenue year to year, just a steady, significant decline. And if you look at least in the last 10 years, it's down approximately 53%. So it continues to show that we are in need of additional funding from the general fund.
And, you know, one of the takeaways from the finance meeting here is essentially what it is every year, which is we're either going to need, given a shrinking pie here, we're either going to need a bigger piece of the shrinking pie from the state penalty fund, or we're going to need additional general fund. And that's from a post-COVID general fund, which of course has a great deal of pressure on it, more than we've seen in the last decade or so. So anyway, this slide just shows, as we show every meeting, that the inexorable decline of the state penalty fund. So Scott, I'll go by whatever order you got them in.
All right, let's jump into slide number 2, which is the 2021 budget allocation. Also aligned with it are the 1920 and the 1819, which we'll talk about later. But essentially, for 2021, we were consistent with the 1920 budget with our final budget allocation of 82.234. We went up just ever so slightly, but not of any significance.
Right. And you'll see that there it shows over in that third column, if you see from the state penalty fund authority, that $45 million. So that represents about 55% of post supports coming from the SPF, and about 43% is coming from the general fund. So you can see how those two figures are going to have to be adjusted somewhat going forward. Otherwise, it's good news. It's no mean feat to hold your own in this budget environment.
Correct. And if we jump into slide 3, and I'm going to hand this off to John to talk about the May revision and or Executive Director Alvarez as well, if they want to jump in on this relative to some movement of money that we had over the last few fiscal years that affected this fiscal year.
Okay, well, this shows the May revision for the governor's budget. Out of this, you have a 10 million augmentation from the general fund from 2018. Now that's what we've come to know as the Shirley Weber Fund for the de-escalation, crisis intervention training, and innovation grants. So $10 million was augmented from that to cater towards distance learning for 2020. That's what it's showing here. And it's also showing that out of our budget for the proposed was originally $35 million. May revision revises it to $45 million because of that $10 million augmentation. Next slide. With that said, the state's looking at a $26 million difference in the general fund. So $15 million went back to the general fund from 2019. And then 2016 gave back an additional $1.5 million, totaling $16.5 million. And then the $10 million from 2018 was used to augment for 2020. So that's a breakdown of that per the enacted budget for 2020.
And I think that'll be more clear, John, when we go to the 1920 expenditure thing. But let's
Sure.
We'll talk about it there.
Yep. Next slide. So if you do a 2020 breakdown for expenditures, this is not expenditures, this is the budget. So for 2020 budget breakdown, we're just focusing on what's going on for 2020. Next slide will be the expenditures. So overall, the expenditures are for the state penalty fund. We have $17 million so far for this year. General fund showing $6.7 million, $24 million total. If you go to the next slide. Now within that slide for 2020, this is the budget breakdown for general fund, just focusing on general fund alone for the 2020 fiscal year. We've already spent $6.7 million. And out of that, you see the breakdown for use of force, admin, training, and the local assistance portion. Now, moving on to 2019 is where you're going to see those differences, what we gave, where the state took back the general fund. Next slide. So we're focusing on 2019 now. Originally, the budget was 82 million. Next slide.
Well, yeah, okay, go ahead. This is the slide I wanted. Yeah, go ahead.
Correct, yeah. So originally, we were getting 34,995 for general fund, but this is where we start to see the difference. Now, we don't have it portrayed here on the slides, but out of that 34,995, we have a $15 million deduction that went back to the general fund. If you go to the next slide.
Well, let's hold off a second. Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's see, this is the 1920 expenditure
Go back
report. Yeah, that one's fine. I mean, so really what happens though with that general fund, I think what you're talking, John, that $35 million there and for 1920 should really be $20 million if you back out the $15 million. So what it looks like, if you look at this slide in the middle, in the 2019-20 year-to-date balance, the third column in the middle, the 24.7 million, it looks like Post is sitting on about $27 million in unspent funds from the prior year. Now that's a pretty big number and would raise some eyebrows in finance and everywhere else. But if you adjust it basically down by the 15 million, right, you're looking at $8-9 million, but that's still a large number. So I think one of the few takeaways or the few interesting points to talk about today is that, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but we're looking at $8-9 million there in unexpended funds from the 1920 year. The Department of Finance, the legislature, their decision-making in the next 12 months will be whether to revert this money to the general fund or do they reappropriate it to Post for distance learning or something else. So, ironically, while we're going to be facing COVID pressure and state penalty fund pressure, we're sitting at what looks like about a $9 million unexpended balance from 1920. So probably one of the biggest budget decisions to be made by the administration going forward will be what to do with this: revert it, reappropriate it, how to characterize it. Scott, Manny, John, do you see it in a different light?
I think that's an accurate statement. But what I would say, if we go on to that next slide, slide 10, that kind of breaks out the general fund. When you look down in the use of force, where the $15 million came from, still left us with a balance. And then if you go back to the training that was contracted for 19 and 20, yet, as we'll get into some slides later, shows that it actually hasn't occurred, and therefore we haven't paid out the training funds, both in TRRs and for those presenters. We're going to expend that down even further, down to probably close to zero as best we can. So while it looks on paper right at this second like it's not a positive thing and it's COVID related for sure, I think by the time we get into early next calendar year, we should see these funds drawn down significantly.
Although, again, these funds, I think, the budget was supposed to close, finance will close the books pretty soon on the 1920 year. And it looks like, which ended obviously in last July. So there's going to be some decision-making on how to characterize that money going forward. I think that's unavoidable. Manny, do you have a different view or?
Thank you, Commissioner Long. No, I agree with Scott. I think it will draw down our training contracts. Going into the new budget year, we started having some discussions with Department of Finance in April and in May about what we were going to do with our funding and whether we were going to be able to revert money. We also knew the state was in a difficult financial situation because of COVID. So one of the things we were able to do was extend or do amendments to our training contracts, which is about somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million, which were going to expire on June 30th. We were able to amend them all the way to December 30th of this year. So we are still going to be expending some of our training contract money from 1920 through December 30th. So we will be able to draw down on that. Granted, it will be not at the same rate that we've always drawn down on those training contract funds, but they're still out there, and we could still be doing training up until the end of December 30th with 1920 money. And I think that's why Scott's saying that that $9 million pot of cash will, slowly be whittled away. I don't know if we'll get to zero, but we will make a dent on it.
Okay. Next slide, Scott, wherever you're heading.
All right, so next slide, slide 11, and it's essentially the same slide we've seen several different times, just depicting the budget for the last 3 fiscal years. So we'll go past that. And this is FY 18-19 general fund expenditures. And in this funding is where we obtained that $10 million for the distance learning, which we didn't discuss previously on how that was broken down, but that $10 million being used for this fiscal year and expiring at the end of June was $5 million for grants for distance learning and online training, $3 million to enhance online platforms and infrastructure for distance learning, and $2 million for development of distance learning and training online courses. So that's the how we're going to expend that $10 million that was adjusted and pushed into this fiscal year.
Okay. I think we move on to contracts, right?
Yeah, in a variety of ways, contracts, grants, and then some equipment and infrastructure enhancement for here at Post. Then you'll also see on there the de-escalation equipment monies with the $5 million that was in the original budget for it. We've expended just a little over $2 million now for the virtual reality de-escalation equipment, and we are looking as well to purchase additional machines to draw down more of that money by the end of the year when the money goes away. Comments on that?
That's it. We move on into contracts, I believe, right?
Yeah, the next slide is going to just be training reimbursements
Right.
as a comparison for calendar year of all of 2019 versus calendar year this year to date. And one of the interconnected pieces of when you look at our 2020 reimbursements of total process of just over 27,000 and just $6.9 million returned to agencies is when, due to COVID starting in March, when training was put on a halt, then the agencies weren't going to send their folks to training, and then therefore the reimbursements were not going to come in. But as we extended many of the contracts that Manny spoke of just a little bit ago, and we'll go into in the next couple slides, we are extending them for time, so they didn't just end on June 30th of 2020. They're actually going through, in some cases, December 31st of this year, but in some cases we pushed them into 2021 because we had essentially a year to extend for time. So we're going to try and catch up on the 1920 money, both in contracts, so again, it'll draw down that, and then the TRRs relative to those training events will kick in as well. So we'll draw down and pay more out. So come February and June for the next 2 commission meetings, you'll see an increase certainly of TRRs that were paid out relative to 2020 funding. Right.
Now to contracts, Scott, or do you have more?
Nope. We have 2 more slides. The next slide there is a representation of previously commission approved slide or contracts, for the 1920 fiscal year. We kind of wanted to close the books on these again with a caveat.
Scott, if I could say, as you walk us through the contracts, I think these 2 pages will be very helpful to kind of understand why we have some extra, obviously 1920 money. So if you could kind of walk through and at least select some that you'd like to point out where we always talk about, the unexecuted balance and then the amounts approved. But in fact, this slide and the next, the issue of how much has actually been expended is of issue now given COVID and so forth. So that issue, and as well as if you see on a number of these, there's a disparity, obviously, between the 2019 approved contracts and 2020. So if you could just touch on some of the more obvious ones we've talked about a little bit, that would
Sure. Yeah, we'll do.
be appreciated.
Okay, very good. So the second column, the approved contract, that's the actual number that commission previously approved last year for the 1920 contract season or fiscal year. The third column there is the executed contract, actually how much we executed in the contract itself and was encumbered for that. And then we also have a number that we've not on this slide that we have pulled for the invoiced amount year to or fiscal year to date pursuant to those contracts. Again, we keep circling back to we've extended many of these contracts. And if you take an example of the ICI, which is line 1 up there within training program services, they had almost $4.5 million in executed contracts. And if I can read off my 1920, there to date, we've only had 1.18 million invoiced to us. But again, we point back to COVID and the fact that we have extended in these contracts certainly to the end of the year and several of them into next calendar year. We should be able to expend that down, but it causes us some challenge because we also have the 2021 contracts, which you'll see over in the far right column. Those are the approved amounts this year that the commission has approved. So we've got a lot of money in contracts that we're trying to both expend down the 1920 monies as well as execute some of the 2020 contracts. So it's going to be a challenge for the presenters to get these online because the agencies are just now sending their folks back to training events that had been basically put on hold for the last 6 or 7 months. So it certainly is a challenge for all. We talked about extension for time. Do we have any other comments on these? Manny, would you like to?
Yeah, I'd like to, if I may, Scott. If we could scroll down to the very bottom of that chart, Tobias, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So yeah, just to add on to what Scott said about COVID and just some of the issues with deploying training. It's the same slide, just further down, Tobias. So Scott touched on the challenges with us getting training completed in the field because of COVID. To give you an idea, if you can recall, during the lean years of post, we had about $14 million in training contracts to get out to the field. And that was lean, and we were spending all of that money. This fiscal year 1920, we allocated over that amount at about 18.5 million. We've only, according to what's been invoiced, we've only expended or pushed out money totaling $9.46 million. So we're not spending as much as we were during the lean years. And that, again, we attribute that directly to COVID and the lack of training opportunities in the field. So of those numbers, even though we have 18.5 million from 1920 to spend, we still have a good $9 million in training contract money to spend. That also has a trickle-down effect in that that's just to deliver the training. On the backside, you have the local assistance money to get to the training. That also is not being expended at the same rate because people aren't going to the training that's being delivered via contract. So you see the LOAs, the TRRs going down, and you see the training monies going down or not being spent at the same rate that we were spending, for the last number of years. Thanks, Scott.
Manny, if I could ask a question on that, though, but so for the appropriators, from the position of the appropriators, the legislature, finance, and so forth, they're going to want to know, like, for example, the $10 million that John mentioned earlier that was reappropriated for distance learning, essentially. They're going to want to know that 10 million, and do we need a further investment in order to use this contract money in, say, 2021, assuming that COVID is still a problem. I think that will somewhat frames the issue, and what would be our response to that?
Well, I think our response would be, at a minimum, we would be spending money at the same rate that we've been spending for the last 10, 20 years for some of these training courses. Obviously, if we were spending at $14 million and we were spending all that money over the course of 12 months, and now we're 16 months into spending this cash and we're still not spending it, there's a reason for that, and that's COVID. If you look at the management course numbers, it says that, and that's the course for lieutenants to go to. It's a mandatory course. All lieutenants have to go through that course within 1 year of being appointed. So far, we have spent $509,000. That's it. When we've allocated 1.2, a mandatory course, and it just goes on and on and on. Whether it's EDC, again, we've allocated $282,000 for the executive development. We've never changed that amount significantly over the last 10 years. That's kind of remained the same. We've only spent $74,000. There's a reason for all of that. And really it's COVID and other things that are drawing law enforcement from not doing training or not being able to do training. So at a minimum, I think we're going to be operating at the same levels we were historically. We're just not there right now because of COVID. So that would be the argument. We've been spending at a certain level for many, many, many years, and we're obviously not right now. And it's directly related to COVID.
Oh, no, I think that's a solid answer, but I was more curious about our ability to pivot and whether we'll, in terms of distance learning and the interest in distance learning the legislature has shown by reappropriating that $10 million. Will that come into play for 2021? For the next until the end of the 2021 fiscal year?
So I think we have some presentations at advisory and at the commission meeting on distance
Okay.
learning. What we're doing with distance learning, we expect that that's going to continue. One of the things that we're hoping to be able to provide some statistics once this cycle is complete for CPT, which is the 2-year cycle ends in December, that we can run a report on how much training was done in person and how much training was done online, because previously the online training was primarily the training that was on the post-learning portal. But I think you'll see an exponential growth in training that is now being conducted. What's normally been conducted in the classroom has been conducted online. I think you'll see a significant growth in that area. Maria, you had something to add? I apologize.
Yeah, I think that the $10 million that we were given for the distance learning platform, as well as the distance learning programs, will be spent. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't spent. And unfortunately, these numbers are a snapshot in time. It doesn't show what we are going to give to Department of Finance, and we have a very transparent and very good relationship with the Department of Finance. They know our past practice. If you look at the ETR or the TRRs, we spent $25 million last year. We're up to $6.9 million this year. There is a direct relationship. They're aware of that. We have meaningful conversations with Department of Finance all the time, so they know exactly where we stand and what our plan is going forth. And I don't think we're going to be penalized for not spending all the money just because we don't show it right now. And even if we don't spend it, I think that they realize once we get back up and going and COVID tends to calm down a little bit, that we will be back in business and spending the money as we should be for our stakeholders.
Agree completely with that. It's just a matter of making sure that people understand what the issues are going forward. I agree completely with that. Scott, are there any more comments you want to make about the contracts?
The only other comment I would make if we switched over to the 2021 contract on the very last page on the slide deck, we'll see the similar the approved commission amount, the amount of executed, and we did a quick run prior to this meeting of invoices received pursuant to 2021 contracts. And of that $18.5 million of executed contracts, we've received thus far for the fiscal year $258,000 in invoices. So I think that speaks volumes and piggybacks on what Manny discussed about the 1920. going back, and our vendors and presenters are trying to scramble to get the 1920 done, as well as execute 2021. And while I know that we're going to get down the road on expending down some of our budget, it's still a challenge, and that's evident by that particular number where we haven't invoiced but for 258,000 for the fiscal year for 2021.
Anyone with questions or comments? If that's it, I believe that's all we have on our agenda today. Scott, anything else we got on the agenda?
Not from our end, thank you.
So the fact, we're sitting at a point in time of the budget development where finance is just getting to work on it. So we really don't have a lot to discuss other than the main takeaways would be that Post has been made whole again, as we've commented on several times. There will be pressure for continued support, either from the general fund or the state penalty fund going forward. There's going to be a lot of pressure on a post-COVID budget, general fund revenue source. So that will be interesting to see how that comes out. From where I stand, it looks to me like there's a good story to talk about in terms of the unspent 1920 funds, but it's a story we'll have to tell. And that is about it in terms of takeaways. Any questions or comments? Mr. Executive Director, anything you want to add?
I think the only thing that I would add is, Commissioner Long, you and I spoke offline, that 16.5 million that was reverted back to the state last spring. It's basically $15 million that came from the 1920 local assistance budget that was going to expire at the end of June. And then 1.5 million that was from the 2016-17 budget that was related to procedural justice and implicit bias that expires this coming June. Is 5-year money. So that comprised the 16.5 million that went back to the state in the spring with the new budget for the old budget process and the May revise and such. So that's it. No, we're doing our part to get the contracts out. It's not a delay in the contracts because we get the contracts out right at the very beginning of the fiscal year or before the fiscal year. And the presenters have the ability to put on that training at any given time. We budget for X number of courses, and all they have to do is invoice us once they put on the courses. But some of the cities and counties are restricting their peace officers from going to training unless it's essential or mandated training. That's gotten a little bit better, I think, with time as we progress with understanding COVID a little better, but it's still having an impact on us. Right now, it's just waiting for them to put on the training and bill us for it.
All right. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Absent that, I could say we don't need a motion since there's only 3 of us, but Manny, were you reaching for your mic?
Yeah, we'll regroup at 2 for the advisory committee for those that are planning on listening or those that are offline. The next meeting's at 2.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you, Lila. See you, Bob.
Bye-bye. Okay. I know, it's right when I have to do the live stream of advisory.
Do what I can.
I know, I only need like the 5 minutes. I mean, they're all good with their background. I'm just,
You're not muted, Elaine.
sorry, we're coordinating schedules over here.